Just going to get in this video out to Tamworth, New England people, only because I was flipping through the old photo album. Oh, by the way, I bring up Mum's cousin, which is Sharon Newcomb, and her husband Chick Newcomb, which is Charles Newcomb. That's her mother. So that's my grandmother Lola's sister, Mari. I was flipping through it the other day. Some of my photo albums turned up. So they're from Leichhardt. So as I've said, my nana's from 43 Pipe Street, Leichhardt. And my great-grandmother, who was close to Big Nan, I've always called that Nan's house, and so is Mum's cousin. So Mum's cousin is a retired police officer still living in Leichhardt, and that's Brian Keegan. Brian Keegan's father was Brian Keegan Senior, which is Nan's brother. It was actually Nan's favourite brother, but that's what Nan used to always tell me. And I remember Uncle Brian all the time. We used to stay in Kerry Road. Anyway. So that's where they're from. My family is originally from the inner city suburbs of Sydney, but they've all moved and spread out. All right. And I've often said, look, the only person that still lives in the same area where we're born and raised and so forth is Mum's cousin. He never moved. He's still living in the same area where, you know, because Nan and her brother, they're raised in the inner city, Leichhardt area. He got married in there. It's only my nan and my grandfather were still living in the inner city when my mum was born. That's why my mum was born in Darlinghurst. Okay, my mother's born in Darlinghurst. And then she started her life in Roselle, but Nan wanted more land around her. So they moved to the suburbs. And Nan always said it was a great choice. It was 1960s sprawl, the suburbs, like this fabulous suburban area. But changed. It turned ghetto in the 90s, so they've all moved. So the way it looked when I was even born in the suburbs. So I say this to Tamworth people as well. Look, I'm not from there. So there's stories made up in the last 10 years. It's nothing to do with you. And also there's people that know Daniel Rackley and Mark Rackley guys. This is why the people who actually knew me, like Tammy Gibson, I ran into you over 10 years ago in Tamworth Arcade. Great athlete. Tammy, Amanda and myself, so Amanda Lee Fleming, we're Flemings, not Rackleys. So I've often said, so you guys just remember that we're not related to Rackleys. And the big reason is this: every time I'm affiliated with the Rackleys, I'm affiliated with criminal behaviour. So I've literally, and I'm telling Tamworth in New England, I have been dragged into drug use, cannabis smoking, cannabis dealing, alcoholism, and all this stuff, because that's what the Rackleys have. So you would remember my mother's second husband, my ex-stepfather, Mark Rackley. He was a nurse around a Freemason nursing home called Moonby House. His son, Daniel Rackley, used to hang out there with him as well. Daniel Rackley. So we are all born, like, seriously, I literally in the last 10 years have people with information I had from Shane Childs and Daniel Rackley projected onto me, and we're all born in 1979. So look, Daniel Rackley moved to Tamworth area. So they've always been born and raised in the bush, basically. So is Shane Childs. They moved there, let me see. Well, Mum separated with Mark Rackley in 1994, divorced in 95, and it was after that Daniel moved there. So I'm not going to get into too much for this, but like Shane Hart would know my surname's Fleming. You know, Alan Tongue, who played for Canberra Raiders, would know my surname's Fleming. Because I never let you guys call me under, and Alan Tongue used to call me Jay. So Alan Tongue, when I first met was, you used to call me Jay. So basically, no one, and Darren Sylvester used to call me Jay, no one would have known ever that because if you mistook my name for my stepfather's name, I instantly corrected. The only people that ever made a mistake were the ones solely who did not know me. I'm only bringing this up now because there is a newspaper article here that I've got a copy from. Right, that is myself. And you can see I've got long black hair, but I've got it I've actually said this in posts. I used to do that 90s part where it was long, but I used to slick it down part in the center. Anyway, that's myself there. And that's Lucy Hunt. And they've actually then put my name down because the person who was actually doing this interview, this was for Downtown Interiors, they knew my mother and my stepfather. So instead of listening to me when I've said my surname's Fleming, they've wrote it down incorrectly. So I've often said this so many times that the only time people would have ever made that mistake, and the same here as well, because it was the same person, the same photographer. So this is when I did the mural at the Tamworth Library, and that's actually, look, I'm sorry, but right there, so that's Anthony Wood. Anthony Wood, that's myself. You can see, long black hair. There you go. That's myself there. Anthony Wood, myself. So I've often said, you know, don't, like, you make that mistake. Mark Rackley was involved in bikies, with drug use and alcoholism. So was his son Daniel Rackley. So is the half-caste piece of shit that my mother had with her second husband, which is Faith Rackley. In the last 10 years, I'm dragged into it. So whatever scam I'm dragged into, leave me out of it. Just leave me the hell out of these scams. And there is nothing to do with anyone there besides my mother's family. That is the reason why I don't even bother to go and visit them. And you've got to remember too, we're not from there. I've tried to, even when we first moved there, and like, no offense, so literally some people up there were going, so you had you moved here to have horses. I'm like, no, we had horses in Sydney. And the attitude was, oh, where'd you keep them on the roof? And I was a smart ass back, yes. And I go, yes, we kept them on the roof. We had horse studs in Sydney. My grandparents had horses in the inner city. They had horses in Balmain, Rozelle and Leichhardt. They did. My grandmother's grandmother's sister, there you go, had horses in Randwick. Okay, I rode horses around Moore Park. So from Sydney, but I only lived in New England for 6 years, guys. And it's nothing to do with you guys. Like, you know, there was Shane Hart, there was Trent Brown, there was Laura McDougall, Ainsley Gemma Bartlett, Rochelle, who else I was friends with there? Rebecca Munro. Beck Munro came and saw me when I was in Armidale. So, man, it was up studying in Armidale and I moved there temporarily and Beck Munro came and visited when you guys heard that I was back from Sydney. So that was in 1997, actually. I'm in Armidale and you guys come and caught up with me. I was living in that little cottage house up there. And that was just I was only briefly up there. I just went up there and, man, I was studying at Armidale University. So I went up there. But, you know, I was in Sydney before that. I just left after year 10 and went back home to Sydney. It wasn't a big deal until the last 10 years we made it a big deal. And a group of people have tagged me into being a drug user. I'm not a drug user. Not a cannabis smoker, not an alcoholic. That's all Mark Rackley and Daniel Rackley. It's the Rackleys. And that's basically simple. I mean, guys, my whole family's from the inner city suburbs of Sydney, then the suburbs and the Central Coast, South Coast, North Coast. They just all move around. But the base is the city of Sydney. Now, that's where the base is. Like, I've often said, if I want to be grounded, I come back to Nan's house in Leichhardt. Yeah, Mum's cousin still lives down the road, but I always come back to that place. It's like, if I have a rough week at work, when I was working at Star Casino, I used to go and sit out the front of 43 Piper Street, Leichhardt, because that house was sold when I was 20. And I was going there all the time. It was sold in 1999. I used to sit across the road and draw the viaducts. That's where my great-grandmother lived her life out. That's where my great-uncle, he passed away in 2002. After we sold the house, we had to put him into the nursing home up the road in John Street. So I don't want to be dragged into whatever scam's going on. And I'm dragged into some scam. So don't drag me into it. It's been 10 years and it's cost me a lot of money. But originally from the suburbs of Sydney, I was there for, 6 years. I didn't think we had any problems. I mean, I'm trying to find my Year 10 yearbook. I've gone through everywhere and I can't find where it is. I'm missing a box of documents. I'll keep looking for it. I have no idea. But in the Year 10 yearbook, guys, and we'll search for it. I've got where Shane Hart signed and everything. I thought everything was fine. I just, and as for, I'll say this, I'm not Daniel Rackley, I'm not Shane Childs, I'm not Justin Pascoe, and I'm not Darren Taylor. Those four people, those descriptions of those four people in the last 10 years that an organisation in Sydney harassed me with. So there was some gathering and spreading of false information. I'm there going, where are you getting it from? Because you obviously are trying to go to Mum's area and gather information. You've just described this person. So obviously you're going to where my mother moved to with her second husband. Dad's been at Empire Bay just as long. So Dad's Mark Ian Fleming. Stepdad's Mark Rackley. They're two different people, guys. Two very different people. One of them is involved in criminal behaviour, drugs, alcoholism and cannabis. And the other one's my father, basically. So I've literally had to put up with 10 years in 2 countries of hell. And yeah, I've lived most of my life in the city, I have. But then that's where my grandparents are from. I was close to my grandparents. Lola May, my grandmother's from Leichhardt. Reginald George Purdy, he's from Balmain, Rozelle. His father, Keith Purdy's from Balmain, Rozelle. Pop's mother, Lillian Still, well, she lived her life out in Newtown. Even though Pop says she's from Paddington. Nan's cousin Gary is from Bellevue Hill. Uncle Fred, which is Leo, he was from Bellevue Hill. They all are. So Nan's side was all from like, you know, a better family than Pop's side. Apparently, that's what Pop used to even say. Your grandmother, like, you know, came from a good family. So I've just had shitloads of hell caused in my life that cost me damages for 10 years straight to date, where I was tagged into drug use. And the only reason why it stuck was because people thought I was Daniel Rackley and Mark Rackley. That's it. And I'm not affiliated with drug use. I can't stand. I've always been anti-cannabis. You know, so that's how this went on. You know, Daniel Rackley really, like I went up, so in 1996 when I'm living at Empire Bay on the Central Coast and studied in Newcastle, I went up for a holiday. I literally stepped over Daniel Rackley. He was wiped out of his face. I think it was in Cable Avenue. I was going outside of where Myers used to be, Grace Brothers. And by the way, my dad did, when the Grace Brothers was renovated, my dad did that renovation. My dad came up from Sydney and renovated that, and there's buildings in Farrer High School my dad built. Okay, so my dad, Mark Ian Fleming, the firm he worked for in Sydney on the Central Coast, he actually came to Tamworth, travelled there and built there as well, just so you guys know. But he also built the inside of Westwood shopping complexes. He did Bondi, he did Tuggerah, he did the Palace Hotel food court area, extended that and restored it. That was in Haymarket. He did one of the banks in Marrickville. So he was a good builder. Now he's a grumpy old man because he's had everything reconstructed. He's in a lot of pain, a lot of agony, the poor guy, and he's just got so many health problems that I just wait to see if he's going to message me. Because throughout he's a nice guy, guys. I don't know what's been said. My dad, Mark Ian Fleming's nice. My stepdad, Mark Jeffrey Rackley, should be locked in fucking jail. My mother is, as Tammy Gibson, you would know from those Facebook posts years ago, she's a nut job. She changed, Tammy. She changed as soon as she got with her second husband. And she just really brought a low-life element to the family. She changed. Her parents were disgusted with her. Like, honest to God, a normal person would cross the road if they saw my stepfather and have nothing to do with the person. And my mother decided to date him, fall pregnant to him, which meant she had to marry him. Okay. So not a very nice environment. Not a very nice person to be around. I don't know what the lies have gone on over the years, but I'm going to leave it there and say to you guys, I was only there 6 years. I'm 46 years here. As Tammy Gibson would know, I hadn't seen her for years, and I bumped into her at the Tamworth Arcade when I was up there holidaying, visiting my sister, and it was like, oh my God, how are you? So you would know yourself, I don't have any problem with you guys. Because I bumped into you, and how was it? And I was, you know, yeah, and Tammy Gibson was a great sports athlete. And I remember you from, you know, when we used to do sport and so forth. So, you know, you were, and what was it? Laura, is it Laura McDougall? It's not McDougall. No, Laura, sorry. Because it's Luke McDougall, which was bloody vice principal's son. No, what was it? Laura, I can't think now. No, she's a good swimmer. Those people. And it was Gemma Bartlett, actually, who went with Rebecca Munro to visit me when I was only briefly in Armidale. I just went up there briefly. Yeah, just to, you know, when I was sort of just after I was in between TAFE colleges and stuff, I just wanted to see what it was like because I've always loved old buildings and arty areas. I just couldn't handle nature, guys. Really, I preferred being in the city. Like, you know, Amanda and myself did have very different upbringings because Amanda was attached to our mother. And I really do believe that my mother just puts Amanda up to things now. To be honest, I honestly just... because Amanda doesn't remember anything. It's like, that's because our mum's brainwashing you so much. Like, I look at her now and she's so involved in my mum, I'm just like, okay, whatever. But, you know, we had a very good city life and we had the best of both worlds. So we had the best of the coast, the best of the city, the best of having a horse start in the suburbs, and the best of New England. I was only there 6 years, guys. All my family's from the inner city suburbs of Sydney, and they moved. And the last family members to move from the suburbs of Sydney really was Dad's, because there's nothing left. They're all dead. They're all moved. Like where I grew up in the suburbs of Sydney was like growing up in Dural. The house isn't there. Like the land's not there. It's gone. It was basically, if you ever do go and have a look, and there's actually a Instagram post going about, actually it might be the Zemmets, and ask the Zemmets if they're like their older parents and their grandparents would know my grandfather Reg Purdy, because the Zemets used to come around Kerry Road. But the Zemets, their farm in the western suburbs. So basically, in the western suburbs, we had acres of land. And we had a long driveway, went up to the main house, acres of land in the suburbs of Sydney. That's why they moved. That's why my family moved from the city to the suburbs to have land. Okay, and all these. So the only one left now is this Zemets property where it's built up. So all the land they've turned it into a ghetto. So where I live, like I've looked at it, I'm like, oh Jesus Christ, thank God we fucking moved. It's disgusting. Because it was like living in Dural, and there was all these developers, they brought up all the land and they built over it and they've turned it into low income housing. So that's what they've turned, like and it's like, oh, it's disgusting. But it wasn't like that when we lived there. Like we had a beautiful driveway that was like pine tree driveway, nice big house, swimming pool, landscape gardens, horses. But so did the neighbours. And so the other neighbours. And then the other neighbours. It wasn't this shit area like it is there now. And I went out there in 2016, had a look, and I was like, oh my God. Oh my God. Like, it is absolutely disgusting. And my family moved from the inner city to have land. That's why they were there. And then, like, Mum sold, like, when she got offered money from a developer, she sold the place, the entire place where I grew up, it's demolished over. There's nothing left of it. And there's no one there that would have know us. There's the types of people that I grew up around don't live there. They've all moved. Some of them actually moved to Tamworth. Believe it or not, that there's a family in Tamworth and their parents owned half of Fairfield. So that's Tara Martin and Lana Martin's parents. So Alan Martin, it was his sister Helen Martin, I think the maiden name is. Helen adored me growing up. I absolutely adore her. I hope she's not another one that's passed on. Every time I talk to Mum, one of the old people that are the big old families that I really liked and enjoyed being around have passed on, like Marge. Helen's parents and Martin, Alan Martin, Helen Martin's parents. My grandparents remember them when they owned Fairfield. They owned a massive, huge horse stud in Fairfield. So that's what it was like. Now you look at it, it's like, I would not live there. Oh Jesus fucking Christ! So they brought people that were, decent people, that was like, where you had big horse studs, you owned massive, huge thoroughbred hacks in the suburbs. Back in the late 80s and early 90s, they were buying up everyone's land. And my mother sold. They were buying up everyone's land, demolishing their houses and building over it all. And they were doing that to build low-income housing. So that we went from being a really nice area to moving all these low-income people into the area. And we moved. Mum got out. So I didn't have any problem with that area because Mum sold at the right time, because I was like, and otherwise she would have had to sell and go to the Central Coast or go back into the inner city. Well, in the 90s you wouldn't have lived in the inner city, let me tell you. Because we kept going to the house in Leichhardt and it was still a dive. The inner city didn't change until the year 2000. I mean, we were still going to the sale yards in Homebush Bay and selling horses. Okay, I was still riding my horse around Moore Park. Okay, that's like I said. Like Dad got out. Dad went to the Central Coast. Dad went to Empire Bay. It was a dive. It was an absolute dive. So anyone that has grown up around the inner, like certain suburbs of the inner city, they're not decent. People that have moved into the areas are the ones that are decent, because it's the ones that have come back have the money to come back. The ones that left had the money to leave. The ones that came back to gentrify, they're the decent ones. So they've come back to gentrify. Okay, so anybody that's been born and raised in the city suburbs of Sydney are low-life scum. A lot of them, you'll find. So I don't affiliate people that have been born and raised in the inner city suburbs of Sydney, because like there's a few like you look at the old families like my great grandmother, where she's raised her family in Leichhardt. That's different. Her family's from Bellevue Hill. So Bellevue Hill is different, so it never changed. So Uncle Fred's from there, Nan's cousin Gary Williams is from there, Nan's uncle Tommy Williams is from there, Nan's grandmother's sister, which is Annie Williams Shorkner, is from there. And they're all from Bellevue Hill and Bondi. So a different type of family. But you go to places like Surrey Hills or Redford, like I moved to Surrey Hills and lived there for the longest period of time when they started gentrifying it. But the people that were actually born and raised, it's like, oh God, yeah, I'm not going to socialise with him. And they're like, oh, but we're from him. I'm like, yes, but you're from low income. People that were decent have moved back into the area and gentrified it. People that aren't decent are the ones that are born and raised in those scummy areas. And there's a difference. There's a massive, huge difference. So the ones that actually are decent people are the ones moving into those areas and gentrifying. The ones that are the scumbags, the ones that are born in those areas. And that's, you got to look at what the area was, not what it is now. And I've often said this so many times in the last 20 years when I was like, people are like, oh, but you're from like Rudy Hill. I'm like, yeah, but you gotta look at what the area was, not what it is now. Because when I was growing up, there was all horse studs. So people that had money and they've got all their land brought off them. So you look at what it was, not what it is now. And that's how you're going to get a good judgment of what type of people were there. I mean, was it Bill Friend? I can't think of his wife's name now. They owned a pony stud down the road. Nice, but everyone moved. Some of them moved down south coast, some of them moved up north coast, some moved to Tamworth, some moved even further, some moved like you'll find a lot of this. Like that's why Mum's neighbour, her old neighbour Michael Bly, his grandparents owned part of North Sydney, and that's true. So I'll leave there, and you guys would know this from there. Massive big racing industry around near Mums. So the ones that are really low life scum are the ones that are born and raised in the inner city suburbs of Sydney, because you've been like, if you lived in those areas in the 90s, it was scum. You were nothing but poverty. The ones that are decent, the ones that have moved into those areas. So it's the one, like I would socialise with people that have moved into those areas and gentrified it. I would never socialise with people that are born in those areas. Okay, because they're scum. You wouldn't do that. Different with Leichhardt, like my nan's raised in, Piper Street, Leichhardt, and so forth. That's very different. You got to look at where their family, you got to look at where they're from, not what the area is now. It doesn't. Who cares? You got to look at what it was. It's the same as Rudy Hill. What Rudy Hill was in the 80s, this beautiful area, and it was. But you can see the change happening when they started buying all the land and selling it off to developers. So back then it was like being in Dural. It was nice. It's not now. You have to look at what the area was like, and if that person was, when that person was living there. So I've often said, I would never affiliate with people from, places like Surrey Hills if they're born and raised in Surrey Hills, because they're born and raised in slums. So they're low socioeconomic upbringing people. Just because they're born and raised in the area, they're still low socioeconomic upbringing people. As the people that have moved into the area to gentrify it and make it better, which are the decent people, and that's like myself. I moved into Surrey Hills over 20 years ago. I moved into Surrey Hills.